She was the one person on the crew nobody put on the poster, the one whose name rarely made it into the headline, even though her fingerprints were on every single cabin you fell in love with. That person is Ashley Morrill, the designer behind every completed room in Maine Cabin Masters. And by the time you finish watching this, you'll understand exactly why her story is the one the show never quite told you. Before there was a show, there was a state. Maine is not a place people usually end up. It's a place people are from, and Ashley Morrill is from it in the deepest sense. She grew up surrounded by woods, weathered buildings, and the particular aesthetic of New England working life that doesn't get described in design magazines. Her brother Chase Morrill was already deep into carpentry and construction, the kind of hands-in-the-dirt work that defines rural Maine as much as the lobster boats and the pine trees do. Ashley's background wasn't in construction. It was in design, in the visual instinct for what a space should feel like, not just what it should hold. That difference matters more than people realize when you watch the show. Chase and the rest of the crew bring buildings back from the dead. Ashley decides what those buildings say once they're alive again. Growing up in that environment gave her something most interior designers don't have: a natural relationship with imperfect materials. She didn't learn to love salvaged wood and rough-hewn furniture from a mood board. She grew up around it. That background is precisely why her aesthetic doesn't look like a decorator pretending to be rustic. It looks like someone who actually lived the life she's now designing for. What most viewers don't know is that Ashley's path to the show wasn't a straightforward career move. She wasn't recruited. She was already there, already part of the family business, before it became a television show. When Maine Cabin Masters started, she didn't audition. She was embedded in the operation from the beginning, which is a very different kind of origin story than most people assume. And if you think growing up alongside the people who would become her co-stars was an advantage, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Maine Cabin Masters premiered in 2016, and from the very first season, the format was built around the carpenters. Chase Morrill in front, the crew behind him. Power tools, structural work. The drama of a building in collapse being pulled back to life. That was the pitch. That was the show. Ashley was in it. She was always in it. But the framing placed her later in the episode, in the finishing stages, walking through completed rooms with paint swatches and furniture decisions. In the world of home renovation television, that role has a specific gravity. It's considered the soft end of the hard work, even when the person doing it is the reason the whole project has any emotional resonance at all. The viewers noticed the cabins. They noticed the transformations. What they often didn't notice, or didn't credit, was that the transformation wasn't just structural. The moment a Maine Cabin Masters cabin went from salvaged shell to something a family actually wanted to be inside, that moment belonged almost entirely to Ashley's decisions. The lighting choices, the furniture placement, the color palette that somehow made a 100-year-old building feel warm instead of just old. Television does something particular to creative work that isn't physical. You can film a beam being lifted into place. You can slow motion a nail gun. What you can't as easily show is the hundreds of small decisions that determine whether a space feels right. Ashley's work lived in those decisions, and for years the format of the show made those decisions nearly invisible. She never publicly complained. She kept showing up, kept designing, kept delivering the interiors that turned into the screenshots fans shared and the rooms people tried to recreate in their own homes. But there was a version of this story where that quiet persistence was the whole story, where Ashley Morrill simply remained the person behind the finished cabin forever. Here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. At some point, and this is the turning point the show's audience mostly missed, Ashley stopped treating her design work as a supporting role and started treating it as a business. She launched Ashley Morrill Designs, her own interior design brand operating independently of the television production. Not as a spin-off, not as merchandise, as a genuine design practice with her name on the door. That move is harder than it sounds. When you're known as a character on a television show, even a beloved one, building a standalone professional identity requires convincing people to see you differently than the format has trained them to. Ashley's entire televised persona was attached to a cabin in the woods, to a family crew, to a specific regional aesthetic. Translating that into a client-facing design business meant separating her skill from her context. She did it by leaning into exactly what television had underrepresented about her: the design process, the sourcing decisions, the philosophy behind the work, which in Ashley's case is rooted in authenticity over aspiration, in spaces that look like they belong to the people living in them rather than the magazine that photographed them. Her social media presence became the platform the show hadn't fully given her. On Instagram, Ashley built an audience around her actual creative perspective, the farm, the family, the design decisions explained in her own voice. That audience didn't follow her because of Maine Cabin Masters. They followed her because of her. The distinction is everything for a creative professional trying to establish independent value. This is also where something more personal started to surface publicly. Ashley and her husband Ryan Eldridge, who also appears on the show, built a life in Maine that extended well beyond the production schedule. A farm, a family, a version of the rural life that the show depicted, but lived rather than performed. One phone call, one conversation. That's all it took to change the direction of everything. Unidiyam. This is the part of Ashley Morrill's story that rarely gets said out loud, even though it shapes everything else about it. For most of Maine Cabin Masters' run, she was the only prominent woman in a cast built around male tradespeople. That's not a criticism of the show. It reflects the actual composition of the industry it depicts, but it created a specific set of pressures that are worth understanding. In home renovation television, there's a long history of women occupying the design and decor role, while men handle the structural work. The format is so established it reads as neutral, even natural. What it actually does is create a split in how viewers assign credit. The building work is legible as skilled labor. The design work reads as taste, and taste in our culture gets undervalued when it's performed by women in contexts that are otherwise coded as masculine. Ashley was working inside that dynamic every season. She brought professional design knowledge to a format that didn't always present it as such. Viewers who loved her work often talked about it in terms of personal taste. I love her style, rather than in terms of craft. The difference matters. Saying someone has good taste attributes their work to personality. Calling it craft attributes it to expertise. Ashley Morrill has the second thing, not just the first. She's spoken in interviews about the assumption, early on, that her role was decorative in both senses of the word. That she was there to add warmth to a construction show the way a throw pillow adds warmth to a couch. What she actually brought was a fully developed design practice, with real consequences for the final product. Cabins that didn't sell her work short sold better. Spaces she finished became the spaces people talked about. The data was in the audience response, even when the framing didn't reflect it. What happened next is the reason this story matters beyond the show itself. Maine Cabin Masters didn't stay static. The show moved from DIY Network to Magnolia Network as that channel built out its programming library. And with that move came changes in how the show presented itself to its audience. Magnolia Network's identity is built around a certain kind of domestic authenticity, the Chip and Joanna Gaines model of real family, real work, real home. Ashley Morrill fits that identity more naturally than almost anyone else in the cast. As the show accumulated seasons and a loyal audience, the camera started spending more time with her. Her design segments got longer. Her explanations of why she was making specific choices, what a particular piece of furniture said about the family who would eventually use the cabin, why she was pulling a color from the landscape outside the window, started making it into the final cut more consistently. That shift wasn't accidental. It reflected audience feedback. Viewers wanted more of the design process, not less. They wanted to understand how a space gets from salvaged ruin to the finished room in the after photograph. Ashley was the person who could explain that, and the show eventually gave her more room to do it. Her role expanding on screen coincided with her profile expanding off-screen. The combination of a television audience that had found her and a social media following she'd built independently created a platform that didn't depend on any single production cycle. If Maine Cabin Masters ended tomorrow, it hasn't, but if it did, Ashley Morrill, the designer, would still have an audience and a business. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got, until now. One of the most consistent things Ashley Morrill's followers ask about is the life behind the life. The show gives you the cabins. Her social media gives you glimpses of a farm, of children, of a marriage, of a version of Maine that's quieter and more ordinary than a construction crew pulling a building off the floor. Ashley and Ryan Eldridge have built something in Maine that the show only partially captures. They raise animals, they manage land, they live in the kind of relationship with the natural world that most people who watch rural lifestyle content are reaching toward from a distance. For Ashley, it's not a brand, it's Tuesday. That distinction between the people who perform rural life for an audience and the people who actually live it is something Ashley Morrill's followers pick up on, whether they articulate it or not. There's a texture to her content that doesn't come from a content strategy. It comes from someone who is genuinely at home in the place she's showing you. Her children appear occasionally in that content, in the background of farm life, rather than positioned for the camera. That's a choice. In an era of family content where children are often central to the monetization strategy, keeping them at the edge of the frame is a form of intentionality that goes largely unnoticed, but it speaks to the same values that show up in her design work: authenticity over performance, presence over production. Ryan's role in all of this is worth noting as well. He's not a background figure in her life the way she was occasionally a background figure on the show. He's a genuine partner in the farm, the family, and the life they've built. The Maine Cabin Masters audience knows him from the show. The people who follow Ashley's independent content know him as something more than a supporting character. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What she did instead is the part nobody talks about. Here is the current picture, as clearly as it can be drawn. Ashley Morrill is not someone who happened to be on a television show. She's someone who used a television show as one platform among several, and who has been quietly building the version of her professional life that doesn't depend on a production schedule to exist. Ashley Morrill Designs operates as her independent design brand. Her social media presence continues to grow an audience that follows her specifically. Her aesthetic, her values, her way of looking at spaces and places. Maine Cabin Masters continues airing, and she remains a central part of it. But the relationship has inverted from what it was in the beginning. In 2016, the show gave her visibility. By the mid-2020s, she brings visibility to the show. That inversion is the real story of what happened to Ashley Morrill. Not a departure, not a controversy, not a fall from grace or a dramatic reinvention. Something quieter and more durable. A person who started as a supporting role in someone else's narrative and built, patiently and steadily, a professional identity that belongs entirely to her. The design philosophy that anchors all of it hasn't changed since the beginning. Ashley Morrill still believes that spaces should feel like the people who live in them. She still sources furniture and materials that carry history rather than simulate it. She still brings a rural Maine sensibility to her work that can't be faked because it wasn't acquired. It was grown. The viewers who showed up for the cabin builds and stayed for Ashley specifically understand something that took the show a few seasons to catch up to. She wasn't the woman on the construction show. She was the reason the construction show's finished rooms looked the way they did. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Ashley Morrill's trajectory is not unique to her. It's a pattern that shows up across home renovation television, across trades content, across any format that combines physical construction with interior design, and assigns those two categories to gendered roles. The pattern goes like this. The structural work is filmed as the drama. The design work is filmed as the resolution. One reads as the story. The other reads as the ending. What Ashley's career demonstrates, with a decade of evidence behind it now, is that the design end of that equation carries its own form of expertise, its own professional depth, and its own audience. The people who follow her don't follow her because she's on television. They follow her because she articulates something about spaces and about place that resonates with how they want to live. There's also something worth saying about what she didn't do. She didn't leave Maine. She didn't chase a broader platform in a major city. She didn't try to expand into a version of her aesthetic that would play to a wider demographic by making it less specific. Everything about Ashley Morrill's professional evolution has been an act of going deeper into what she already was, rather than wider towards something she wasn't. That's a rarer choice than it sounds. Television creates pressure toward expansion and scale, toward the bigger platform, the wider audience, the more visible brand. Ashley built her audience by refusing to perform for it. She showed up as the person she actually is, in rural Maine, on a working farm, with a design practice rooted in specific materials and specific values. And the audience that wanted that found her. Maine Cabin Masters made her visible. The decade of work she's put in since has made her matter. Warmananeth. Ashley Morrill's story isn't about what happened to her. It's about what she built. One cabin, one design decision, and one quietly persistent choice at a time. She entered a format that underrepresented her, stayed in it long enough to reshape how she was seen within it, and simultaneously built something outside it that doesn't need the show to survive. What comes next for her is more of the same, and that's not a small thing. More seasons of Maine Cabin Masters, more design work through her independent practice, More of the farm and family life that her audience has come to care about as much as the cabins themselves. The main chapter is not closing. It's just getting more of the depth it always deserved. So here's the question worth sitting with. Do you think Ashley Morrill was right to stay in Maine and build everything exactly where she already was? Or do you think the bigger move would have been to take her design platform somewhere larger and more visible? Drop your answer below, because this one has two sides and most people feel strongly about it.